Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Tuesday class with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Om Bhur Swaha, Tatsavitra Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat, Asto Ma Sadgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamya. Om Sena Vavtu Sena Bhunaktu Saviryam Karvavahi, Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahi. Om Shanti 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 Om. Let's open our Uddhava Gita books. We're going to start a new chapter today. Chapter number 3. And the story goes on because that Avdhut Brahman is giving the names of all those places and people he has gotten the teachings from, where he learned from. Those are, he says, these are my 24 gurus. So, chapter 3, page number 91. So, let's look at the summary of this chapter given. It says in this chapter, the Avdhut Brahman describes the lessons to be learned from the 7 remaining spiritual masters. Beginning with the Kurar bird, he also describes an additional guru, one's own body. The instructions of the Kurar bird is that attachment is the mother of all distress. One who is unattached and has no material possessions is qualified to achieve unlimited happiness. Number 2, the Avdhut Brahman learned from a foolish, lazy boy that by becoming free from anxiety, one can nicely worship the Supreme Lord and experience transcendental bliss. Number 3, the instruction received from the young girl who kept only one conch shell bangle on each wrist is that one should remain alone and thus steady his mind. Only in such a condition will it be possible for one to fix his mind completely on the Supreme Lord. Once several men arrived to ask for the hand of a young girl whose relatives had coincidentally left the house. She went inside and began to prepare food for the unexpected guests by beating the rice paddy. At that time, her conch shell bangles made a loud noise, rattling against each other. In order to stop this sound, the girl broke off the bangles one by one until at last only one remained on each arm. Just as 2 or more bangles make noise, if 2 or more people live together, there is bound to be quarrel and useless gossiping. Number 4, the Avdhut Brahman also received instruction from the arrow maker, who was so absorbed in constructing an arrow that he did not even notice that the king was passing right by him on the road. In the same way, one should worship Shri Hari with undivided attention and a controlled mind. Number 5. The lesson to be learned from the serpent is that a sage should wander alone, should not live in any pre-arranged place, should be always careful and grave, should not reveal his movements, should take assistance from no one, and should speak little. Number 6, this is the lesson to be learned from the spider. Just as a spider makes its web from its own saliva and then withdraws it, the Supreme Lord creates this universe from out of himself and then winds it up into his own body. Number 7, from the weak insect that assumed the form of a wasp, the Avdhut Brahman learned that the living entity, under the sway of affection, hatred, and fear, attains in his next life the identity of that object upon which he had fixed his attention. Number 8, realizing that the temporary material body is subject to birth and death, and that this human form of body is extremely rarely achieved. A sober person should give up his attachment for the body and should properly utilize his time for acquiring knowledge so that he can attain the goal of life. So this is the summary of this chapter 3. And in this chapter, he has ended what he has learned from all these places. So let's look at verse number 1. Parigraho hi dukhaye yad yat priyatam nirana anantam sukham apnoti tad vidwan yastu akinchan. The Avadhut Brahman said, everyone considers something of this world to be very dear to him. Because of such attachment, one ultimately becomes morose. One who understands the simple truth should give up the false sense of possessiveness and thus tread the path to true happiness. This chapter describes the 7 spiritual masters, beginning with the Kurar bird. The material body has been added as the 8th spiritual master in this chapter. In total, the lessons to be learned from 25 spiritual masters are described. The first 2 verses of this chapter deal with the lesson to be learned from the Kurar bird. When one enjoys the object that is most dear to him, he will certainly face great distress later on. On the other hand, those who remain aloof from such attachment, remaining as a kinchan, are to be known as learned men who are qualified to achieve unlimited happiness. See, we think that happiness comes from attachment, from being with people, having objects, going to places. But this Avadhut Brahman learned the real happiness comes from detachment. That's why this detachment is talked about in all the scriptures. Detachment from the temporary, only then we can have attachment to the real. So let's look at the purport also, where this author's opinion is about this verse. As a result of forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord, the conditioned soul's taste for objects produced by the material modes of passion and ignorance increases unlimitedly. The conditioned souls rarely have the inclination to attain the platform of pure goodness, from which one can realize the Supreme Lord. All material miseries are produced from the influence of the modes of passion and ignorance. Passion is the Rajsikta, ignorance is Tamsikta. The momentary lack of distress experienced due to the influence of mode of goodness is not the same as genuine spiritual happiness. So that means even the goodness, the Satvikta, is not the real happiness. That could be attachment to the goodness also. Unalloyed devotees do not notice the presence of temporary distress produced by the interaction of the modes of nature because they experience unlimited happiness due to being situated on the platform of pure goodness. So that means living in this world, this material world is made up of these 3 guns. So, but if you have attached, if you already know what the real happiness is, these fluctuations in the outer world does not make you unhappy. Conditioned souls who are under the control of their senses run after limited, ever-changing and tempting material objects and thus become beggars to achieve their objectives. This is the cause of their distress. Let's look at verse number 2 in this chapter. Samisham kururam jagnur balino ne niramisha tadamisham parityajyaha sasukham samvindit. So now he is giving that story about that bird. He says, once a large coorer bird was very hungry. Being unable to find any prey, it attacked a weaker coorer bird who had some flesh in its claws. Being in danger of his life, the weaker coorer bird gave up his meat and thereby attained actual happiness. So that small bird was holding something and just let it go. That's what the detachment is. So the word samisham in this verse refers to a meat-eating coorer bird. When a coorer bird was chased by another stronger coorer bird, it dropped the flesh in its claws and thus achieved happiness. Incited by the modes of nature, birds become violent and kill other birds, either to eat them or to steal meat captured by them. Hawks, vultures, and eagles are in this category. A human being should give up the envious propensity to commit violence against others and should take to Krishna consciousness, whereby one sees every living entity as equal to oneself. On this platform of actual happiness, one does not envy anyone and thus sees no one as his enemy. Because when we see that others are part of us, there's a unity in this diversity. How can we harm anybody? So just like in our own body, we see different parts, different organs. We would like to harm. The right hand will not like to harm the left hand. Okay? So that's what he's talking about, just oneness, oneness. Number 3, na me man apmanav satau na chinta gehe putri naam atam creed atam ratir vichraha mihi balvat. Those who are attached to family life are always anxious about their children, wealth, and reputation. But I have nothing to do with all these. I do not worry about a family, and I have no concern for praise or insult. I live the life of the eternal soul, and I experience affection on the spiritual platform. Thus, I wander over the earth like a child. So, when one has no interest in accumulating worldly praise or criticism, he can become fixed in the science of the self. So, attachment is not only with the body or with the things or with the wealth or the relatives, but also the name and the fame. So we got to detach from all these ishnas. Putrishna, Viteshna, Lokeshna. So when we let go of these desires, only then we can really experience this kind of a happiness, spiritual happiness. Verse number 4. Dvav ev chinteha muktahu paramanand aplatahu yo vimugdo jado valo yo gunebhya paramgata. In this world, two types of people are free from all anxiety and merged in great happiness. One is the retarded and childish fool, and the other is an advanced transcendentalist who knows the science of the absolute truth. So in this verse, the lesson to be learned from a foolish boy is described. The Brahman said, I don't care for honor and dishonor. I'm not worried about house, children, and so on. Just like a child, I happily wander about alone in this world. The more one prays for sensual enjoyments in this material world, the more his desires for such enjoyment increase, so that he becomes more and more absorbed in matter. Those who are indifferent to material pleasures are freed from material miseries and are happy. See, happiness we are all seeking for, but we are seeking the wrong way. Number 5. Kochit kumari tva atmanam vrina nan griham agatan swayam tan aharyam askopi yateshu bandhushu. Once a girl of marriageable age was at home alone because her parents and relatives were away. At that time, some men came to ask for her hand in marriage, and so she received them with all hospitality. So the lesson to be learned from the unmarried girl is being described. Once some men went to the house of an unmarried girl to ask for her hand in marriage. It so happened that the girl's relatives were away from home at the time. So the unmarried girl received the guests nicely, offering them asans of kush grass and water. Number 6. Tesham abhi vahara artham shalin rahasi parthiv avganatyaha prakoshtaha sathascha chakru shanka swanam mahat. O king, when that unmarried girl began to beat rice paddy to prepare food for the unexpected guests, the conch shell bangles on her arms began to collide with each other and create a loud noise. Wondering when the people of the house would return and begin to cook, the girl began to prepare the rice to serve the guests. However, her conch shell bangles began to make a loud noise. Number 7. Sataj jugupsihi stam matva mahati vringtaha tata bhav jakakesh shankanana dvodvo panyor sheshyat. The young girl was afraid that her guests would know that her family was poor because she was performing the menial task of husking the rice. Being very intelligent, the girl broke the conch shell bangles so that only 2 remained on each wrist so that they don't make a sound. Ubhyor api abhudghosho hi avghanantyah swashankyo tatrapye ekam nirbidh ekasmin nabhvad dhvani. Thereafter, when the young girl resumed husking the rice, the bangles once again made noise by colliding with each other. Then the girl took off 1 more bangle from each arm, leaving only 1 so that the noise completely stopped. The girl was embarrassed because husking rice is the job of a servant in the house of a well-to-do people. The intelligent girl then took off her bangles 1 by 1, leaving only 2 on each arm. When these bangles again began to make noise, she took 1 more bangle from each arm, leaving only 1. Anav shiksham ivam tasyaha upadesham arindam lokan anucharen etan lokaha tum vivitsya. O subduer of the enemy, I travel over the surface of the earth, learning about the nature of this world. Thus, I personally witnessed the lesson taught by this girl. Okay, so Avadhuts, they wander around. They don't have a home, they don't have a shelter. They just keep on wandering. And he said, while wandering, this is what I learned from this girl also. The Brahman sage explained to King Yadu that what he was speaking was realized knowledge. By wandering over the world, he had experienced everything that he had learned from the gurus under discussion. See, like when we learn, sitting in a classroom, that is a theoretical knowledge. But when we see in the world, we apply that knowledge. That is the experienced knowledge. So this is what he's saying, that I learned it from the gurus first, but then I experienced it by watching all these people, how they were living. Instead of pretending to be an all-knowing mystic, he simply described what he had learned during his wanderings. Number 10. वासे बहुनाम कलहो भवेद वार्ता द्वयोर अपि एक एव वसेत तस्मात् कुमार्यः इव कनकना. When many people live together, there will undoubtedly be quarrels. Even if only two people live together, there will certainly be frivolous conversation and disagreement. That is why one should live alone, following the example of the young girl and her bangles. The lesson to be learned from the girl who removed all her bangles, but one is that one who is trying to advance on the path of Gyan Yoga, which involves philosophical speculation, should live alone after giving up all desires for having the association of friends and relatives. After all, whenever people live together, they quarrel over insignificant matters and engage in much trivial talk that has no relation to their aspiration for spiritual advancement. Therefore, just to have a peaceful environment in which to practice yoga, it is recommended that one live alone. On the other hand, a princess who has been married to a qualified prince dresses herself very attractively and then appears before him to receive his love. Similarly, Bhakti Devi decorates herself with the association of Vaishnavas who assemble to chant the holy names of the Lord and dance in ecstasy, because pure devotees do not associate with the non-devotees. In that sense, they reside alone and thus take the lesson of the single bangle from the young girl. After all, pure devotees do not quarrel among themselves, nor do they engage in frivolous talks, because they are fully satisfied on the platform of rendering devotional service to the Lord without any material desires. Thus, devotees of the Lord happily associate with one another for the purpose of rendering service to the Lord. The Supreme Lord has personally said in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So what he's saying that, living alone for the spiritual enhancement, and if you want to have the company, make sure you are very careful about the company you keep. The company of the devotees is recommending. Company of the same-minded people. A pure devotee who is attached to the activities of devotional service and who always engages in the service of my lotus feet never desires to become one with me. Such a devotee who is unflinchingly engaged always glorifies my pastimes and activities. So this is the verse from Bhagavad Puran he's reciting over here. If there is more than one person in a place, there's every possibility that there will be a quarrel. Because each individual has his own idea and purpose. So quarrel really means there could be a disagreement. There could be a useless talks, wasting time. When the girl took away all her bangles except one on each wrist, there was no more noise as a result of colliding with each other. Similarly, one should give up the association of those who are not devoted to the Supreme Lord. The character of a Vaishnava is always pure. However, in places where non-devotees congregate, there will undoubtedly be envious criticism of Vaishnavas. And Vaishnava is the devotees of a Lord Vishnu. That's called a Vaishnava. If many people gather to glorify the Lord, there will be no conflict of interest. That is why one should worship the Lord in the association of like-minded people. Because otherwise, there could be arguments. The devotees of the Lord Shiva will say, no, Lord Shiva is better. So you got to find the like-minded people. Only then there will be some kind of a peace over there. This is also solitary bhajan as described in the system of Ekayan. Let's look at next verse 11. Man ekatra sayujint jitah shwaso jitasnah vairagya abhyas yogena griyamanam at indrita. One should perfect his yoga, sitting postures, and the breathing exercises while carefully cultivating a life of renunciation. Thus, with single-minded attention, one should engage in yoga, making it the goal of his life. So one should practice concentrating his mind. This lesson is to be learned from the arrow maker. The mind is always flickering due to material attachment, wandering here and there. Here it is recommended to perfect a life of renunciation. One should practice Ashtanga Yoga mixed with devotional service. So even the yoga abhyas when we do, we try to concentrate on the mind. That's why we tell our mind to stay fixated in one of the chakras or any part of the body. Do not let your mind wander away anytime. So practice of the Hatha Yoga becomes a practice of the mind also. Okay. Verse number 12. Yasmin manolabdha padam yat etech chashnai shanair munchati karam renuna satven vridhen rajas tamascha vidhuyaha nirvanam upate anindanam. The mind can be controlled when it is fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because when you give your mind something so beautiful, so enchanting, the mind doesn't like to go anywhere else. So that is what Supreme Personality is, God. When the mind is thus applied to the service of the Lord, it becomes free from polluted desires for sense gratification. So that as the mode of goodness increases in strength, one can completely give up the modes of passion and ignorance. So Rajsikta and Tamsikta. See, up to the Satvikta, it's our effort. Beyond Satvikta, that is Guru's grace or God's grace. So it becomes free from polluted desires for sense gratification, so that as the mode of goodness increases in strength, one can completely give up the modes of passion and ignorance. When the mind is no longer fed the fuel of the modes of nature, the fire of material existence becomes extinguished. It's like when you stop pouring the fuel into the fire extinguishes. So that one achieves the transcendental platform of direct relationship with the object of his meditation, the Supreme Lord. When the mind is controlled and restrained from the desire for performing fruitive activities, it becomes cleansed of the contamination of passion and ignorance through an increase of the mode of goodness. When the mind is no longer influenced by the modes of passion and ignorance, it becomes steady, and as a result of being situated in the mode of goodness, one becomes joyful. And that is a sustained joy. Sure, there's a joy in the material objects also, but that's not sustained. It's temporary. Okay, so sustained joy is only in Him. The three modes of material nature create conflict among one another. For that reason, those who are actually intelligent carefully control their mind. When one is freed from the influence of the modes of passion and ignorance, one achieves a life of auspiciousness. It is only possible to transcend the three modes of material nature when the mind is fully under control. So we got to have a controlled mind, we got to have a clean mind. That is why we do the abhyas. Let's do one more. Tadevam atmanyehe avruddha chito na ved kinchit bahir antram va yatheshu karo nripatim vrajantam isho gatatma na dardarshaha parshave. There was once an arrow maker who was so absorbed in making a straight arrow that he did not even notice the king when he passed right in front of him. When one's consciousness is completely fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one no longer sees in terms of duality or internal and external reality. If one desires to concentrate his mind on the Supreme Lord, he should study the example of the arrow maker. The arrow maker was so absorbed in his work that even when the king passed by, with so much pomp and commotion, the arrow maker did not even notice him. The only way to withdraw the mind from the objects of the senses is to eagerly engage in the devotional service of Lord Krishna. When the mind is not absorbed in fervently desiring to please the Supreme Lord, it wanders on the subtle platform of accepting and rejecting the things of this world. So that means we keep on switching between the rag and the dvesha. Something which seems pleasing to us, we want it. Something which is not pleasing, we want to stay away from it. By surrendering unto the Supreme Lord and engaging in his devotional service, one can be freed from the continuous struggle for supremacy of the three modes of material nature. For one who is thus fully engaged, the spirit of enjoying things in a mood of being separate from Krishna will not affect him. As long as a conditioned soul wanders within the kingdom of mental speculation, having given up Christian service, he will remain fully absorbed in matter. In this regard, one should carefully consider this verse of the Upadesh Amrita. The meaning of this verse is, one's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. Number 1, eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. So what he's saying, be careful about these 6. If you know that what the goal is and you are moving towards that goal. Number 2, over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. Number 3, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Number 4, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them, and not for the sake of spiritual advancement or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. Number 5, associating with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And number 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. So these are the, according to, again remember, purport is his own opinion. So he says, if you really want to advance and you are learning from this avadhut, make sure you learn by staying, do not become over entangled into this world, because that's how we get entangled. We hold, and eating is not, see, first one, eating more than necessary. Eating is not just the food eating. All the senses, they are eating constantly, but we got to put a little stop there to learn how to control, to know where to draw the line. And second one, over endeavoring of mundane things, very difficult to obtain. Sometimes it's not even doable, but we still exert so much, waste so much energy into something which is not really supposed to be done by us. We should be careful about that. Talking unnecessarily, because when we talk, we are really wasting not only time, our energy also. And the more we talk, the more we get into trouble also sometimes. So we got to be very careful. How much to talk, what to talk, where to talk. Practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. That means that we got to keep an eye on that ultimate goal, spiritual advancement. That's why we need to follow these rules. We got to see whether our advancement is happening there or not. Or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. Sometimes just we make our own rules. We don't want to follow the scriptures. We got to make sure that we do that. Scriptures are not, those injunctions are not just one person's opinion. That is like those rishis, they lived the life. And they knew what could be an obstacle on the path. And that's why they created the rules and the regulations. So we got to follow those. Associating with worldly minded people who are not interested. And Christian consciousness means, again, the spiritual advancement, oneness with God. Okay. So worldly minded people, because sometimes we just get too much, we convince ourselves, no, we got to be successful in this world. But when we walk on this path, worldly success, it's our duty, we do that, but our main endeavor is to connect with God. And especially based on the stage in life, our rishis, they said, yeah, second stage in life, sure. Majority of the people as a householder, they spend more time enhancing their worldly wealth. But even at that time, they make sure that it's not done unrighteously. Dharma is followed at that time too. But in the third stage in life, fourth stage in life, we got to just slowly detach from it. We got to know what kind of a program our rishis have given it to us. How really we can attain that ultimate goal. And being greedy for mundane achievements. So in other words, it's okay to be greedy. Hey, I haven't done enough seva. I want to do more seva. I want to help others more. I want to do more kirtan, more japa, more meditation. In that areas, be greedy. But in mundane activities, control your greed. So let's stop it here, because through this verse also, which is not, I mean, these guidelines which he's giving us, he's really taking our attention towards the right place. So let's do the Shanti part and we'll have a discussion. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Visheshyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.